You're not afraid of failure. You're afraid of discovering that you're not good enough. Take a moment. Remember the last time you felt completely helpless? Maybe it was during an important presentation at work, or a conversation with someone you love where you couldn't find the right words, or that moment when you stood before a difficult choice and froze with fear. Now ask yourself, where does this fear come from? When did you first feel it? We live with the belief that our present is the result of our conscious decisions. But the truth is much more complex. Most of our actions, fears, and hopes are echoes of our childhood. Echoes we often don't even recognize. Imagine your personality as a house, strong, unique, with countless rooms and corners. You see the walls, windows, doors, but you don't see the foundation on which everything stands. Yet it's the foundation that determines how stable your house will be, whether cracks will appear, whether it will withstand the storm. This foundation is laid in childhood. Every significant experience, every word from parents, every emotional trauma or moment of unconditional love, these are the bricks in the foundation of who we become. John Bowlby, the father of attachment theory, said that early experiences with primary caregivers create internal working models, representations of ourselves and the world that influence our entire lives. And often these models work on autopilot, even when we think we're in control. Think about it. Doesn't it seem strange that successful, educated, experienced people can suddenly fall into despair over small things? Why might a qualified specialist with numerous achievements feel like an imposter? Where does the chronic pursuit of perfection, fear of intimacy, or unexplained anxiety come from? The answer usually lies in the past. Marina, 35, is a successful marketing executive. She's always the first to arrive at work and the last to leave. Colleagues admire her professionalism, but don't know that she constantly double-checks herself, fears making mistakes, and can't relax even after completing a project. Where does this come from? At 6 years old, Marina brought home a report card with a B in math. Her father, a brilliant engineer, looked at the grade for a long time, then asked, "Is this all you're capable of?" He didn't yell. He didn't hit her. But his disappointment pierced her heart like an invisible arrow. That day, an equation was fixed in her psyche. My achievements. Also a belief. If I'm not perfect, I'm not worthy of love. 30 years later, these beliefs still control her life, although consciously she thinks she's long outgrown childhood traumas. This is what psychoanalysts call introjects, externally learned rules of life that become part of our personality. We all carry within us the voices of parents, teachers, first bullies, and first protectors. And we often speak their words when we talk to ourselves. Why do I always choose partners who don't value me? Why can't I say no even when I want to? Why do I always put off important tasks? Why do I put myself down in my thoughts, even though I appear confident on the outside? These seem like different questions, but they can all have common roots, childhood traumas and the defense mechanisms we develop to cope with them. Take procrastination. We're used to considering it simply laziness or lack of willpower, but often behind it hides a fear of failure. And behind the fear of failure, a childhood experience where you were ridiculed or humiliated for a mistake. Or our inability to set healthy boundaries. Where does it come from? Perhaps in childhood you learned that your needs weren't important, that you would be loved only if you were convenient, or that expressing your desires would inevitably lead to conflict. Carl Jung said that until we make the unconscious conscious, it will direct our lives, and we will call it fate. That's how childhood traumas work, invisibly but relentlessly shaping our future. Alex always knew what he wanted. At 30, he co-founded an IT company. At 35, he sold it for millions. He's always on the move, always setting new goals. "I'm just ambitious," he explains to friends about his workaholism. But once in a therapy session, he confesses, "You know, when I achieve a goal and stop, I feel emptiness. like something is trying to catch up with me, and I have to keep running. What's trying to catch up with him? During therapy, it turns out that Alex grew up in a family where all conflicts were silenced. No one shouted, no one argued, but no one talked about painful things either. Emotions were suppressed. His parents separated when he was 8, but continued to pretend everything was fine. He learned to do the same, keep the pain inside and focus on external goals. His ambition isn't just a desire for success. It's a way to escape the inner emptiness and unresolved grief he couldn't experience in childhood because he had neither support nor example. Behind any addiction, to drugs, alcohol, food, work, is an inability to experience and express your feelings, wrote psychotherapist Gabor Mate. Alex is addicted to success, to moving forward, but this movement will never lead him to true peace until he looks back and allows himself to feel the pain he has postponed for so long. To understand the power of childhood experiences, we need to turn to neurobiology. A child's brain is much more plastic than an adult's. It actively forms neural connections according to the experience it receives. When a child experiences traumatic experiences, physical violence, emotional neglect, traumatic loss, their brain literally reprograms itself for survival. The so-called lower nervous system is activated, responsible for fight, flight, or freeze reactions. The amygdala, the fear center in the brain, enlarges, and the prefrontal cortex, responsible for logical thinking, may decrease. The result? The brain is tuned to constantly expect danger, and this setting can persist for decades, even when there is no real threat anymore. This phenomenon explains why an adult who experienced emotional abuse in childhood may feel panic fear during an ordinary work meeting, or why a person who was abandoned in childhood may suffer from irrational anxiety when their partner is late from work. The brain doesn't distinguish between past and present. It simply reacts to triggers using familiar models. But I had a normal childhood, you might say. My parents didn't beat me, I wasn't bullied at school, we always had food on the table. That's good. But it's important to understand, trauma isn't just horrible, obvious events. It's also less noticeable experiences. Parents who loved you but didn't know how to show their feelings, high expectations you couldn't meet, situations where your emotions were ignored or devalued, instability in the family, even if it wasn't dramatic, being compared to other children, lack of a safe space to express yourself. Psychologist Donald Winnicott talked about the concept of the good enough mother, not perfect, but one who adequately responds to a child's needs. When these responses are insufficient, the child creates a false self, a mask behind which they hide true feelings. And here's the paradox. Sometimes people who have experienced obvious trauma are more aware of its impact on their lives. While those who grew up in outwardly normal but emotionally empty families may not understand for decades where their chronic dissatisfaction, anxiety, or emptiness comes from, childhood traumas grow in our adult lives as persistent behavior patterns. Psychotherapists identify several of the most common. The self-denial pattern. You put others' needs above your own, always. This may look like dedication, but in reality, it's a survival strategy you learned when you were loved only because you were useful. The perfectionist pattern. You don't allow yourself to make mistakes. You constantly demand more from yourself. This often stems from a childhood experience where love was conditional, dependent on your achievements. The controller pattern. You don't trust the world and try to control everything. This often arises when there was no stability or security in childhood. The victim pattern. You unconsciously seek situations where you're used or powerless. This pattern forms when a child had to adapt to toxic relationships because there were no other options. The self-sabotage pattern. You subconsciously destroy your achievements or relationships when they begin to bring satisfaction. This may be related to a deep feeling of, I don't deserve happiness, or to a fear that happiness will inevitably be taken away, as happened in childhood. The key to changing these patterns is awareness. When we understand what we're doing, and most importantly, why, we gain the possibility of choice. And this choice is the first step toward healing. Famous psychotherapist John Bradshaw proposed the concept of the inner child, that part of us that retains childhood emotions, needs, and traumas. This child still lives in us, and often it is this child, not the adult, rational part, that controls our reactions. When we react too emotionally to minor criticism, when we panic over a small conflict, when we can't let go of an offense, this is our inner child speaking, and it needs our attention. Imagine this scene. At the office, your presentation is criticized. Seems like a small thing, but you feel a wave of shame and despair rising inside. Why? Because your inner child has been activated, and it remembered all the moments when you were laughed at in class, when you were criticized by your parents, when you felt worthless. Reconnecting with this part of yourself is one of the most powerful healing tools. This doesn't mean acting childish. It means recognizing and accepting your childhood experiences, showing compassion toward them, and giving them what they didn't receive at the time, unconditional acceptance. So are we forever doomed to repeat the same mistakes? To repeat the fate of our parents or react to ghosts of the past? No, and neurobiology confirms this. The brain maintains plasticity throughout life. The ability of neurons to form new connections means we can literally reprogram our brain, creating new, healthier reaction patterns. But how exactly? Awareness. Start tracking your triggers. When you react too emotionally, ask yourself, how old am I right now? Often it turns out you feel 5, 10, or 15 years old, exactly how old you were when the original trauma occurred. Validation. Recognize your feelings as real and important. Even if they seem illogical, they have a reason. Reframing. Rewrite your story. For example, if you grew up with the belief, I'm not needed by anyone, start collecting evidence to the contrary in your current life. New emotional experiences. The most powerful way of healing is through new corrective emotional experiences. Healthy relationships, support from friends, working with a therapist, all this gives us new experiences of safety and acceptance. Practice self-awareness. Meditation, mindfulness practices, breathing techniques, anything that returns us to the present moment helps separate the past from the present. Michael, 42, was afraid of public speaking his whole life. Any presentation caused him panic attacks. Because of this, he declined promotions and opportunities that required public speaking. During therapy, he remembered how at age 9, he recited a poem at a school concert and forgot the words. The children laughed, and the teacher said, "Sit down, you've let everyone down." This episode, innocent to an outside observer, was imprinted in his psyche as proof that he was incapable, would let everyone down, would be ridiculed. When he understood this, he began to gradually work with his fear. First, he spoke in small groups. Then he joined a public speaking club. With each successful experience, his nervous system received new evidence. I can. It's safe. After a year, he gave his first major presentation to clients. Yes, he was still nervous, but it was already a normal, healthy level of excitement, not paralyzing fear. In our time, the idea that we should just let go of the past and focus on the positive is popular. Certainly, positive thinking is a powerful tool, but when it comes to childhood traumas, this advice can do more harm than good. Toxic positivity is when we deny or suppress negative emotions instead of processing them. It's like painting over a crack in the wall without addressing the cause of its appearance. Psychologist Carl Rogers wrote, "The curious paradox is that when I accept myself just as I am, then I can change." This principle applies to our traumas as well. We can't just let them go. We must first acknowledge them, feel the pain associated with them, and then integrate this experience into our story. Yes, it hurts, but, as poet Rupert Brooke wrote, with pain in the heart comes joy. And this joy is deeper, more authentic, and more lasting than superficial positivity. One of the scariest things about childhood traumas is their ability to be passed from generation to generation. Psychologists call this intergenerational trauma. Parents who grew up with trauma often unconsciously pass it on to their children through their reactions, words, lack of emotional availability, or excessive control. As psychologist Alice Miller said, "Behind every adult who abuses a child hides a child who suffered from abuse." But this relay of pain can be interrupted. When we become aware of our traumas and work with them, we not only heal ourselves, but also protect future generations. Olivia, 38, a mother of two, recalls, "I grew up in a family where shouting was the norm. My parents shouted at me, I shouted at my younger sister. When my first son was born, I caught myself shouting at him when he, a 6-month-old baby, didn't want to fall asleep. At that moment, I saw fear in his eyes and realized, I'm repeating the same thing. Then I decided, the chain breaks with me." Olivia went through therapy, learned to cope with her emotions, and today raises her children very differently than she was raised. Her children grow up with a sense of security and love she didn't have herself. In concluding our journey, I want to remind you, your past has shaped you, but it doesn't have to define your future. Psychotherapist Peter Levine said, "My past explains me, but it doesn't excuse or limit me." Healing from childhood traumas isn't a linear process. It's a spiral where we go through the same themes at new levels of understanding, and that's okay. We don't just solve trauma. We grow with it, integrate it into our experience, transform it from a burden into a source of strength and wisdom. Famous psychiatrist Viktor Frankl, who survived Nazi concentration camps, wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom." Today I invite you to find this space, the space between your triggers and your reactions. The space where you can meet your inner child with compassion, understand the source of your fears, and make a new choice. It's not easy. It takes courage to face your pain, but the alternative is to continue living on autopilot, repeating old patterns and losing the opportunity to live a truly authentic life. So, what's holding you back? What have you never allowed yourself to do? And what was stopping you? Write your thoughts in the comments, and let's explore together these invisible threads that stretch from childhood and define adult life. Your past won't disappear, but it can become not a prison, but a foundation for a new, freer, and more authentic life. You have everything you need. Remember, what wounded you can become what heals you. You cannot erase a single line from the book of your life, but you can write a new ending. Marcus Aurelius.